Hi, my name is Adam Whitmer. I'm the founder and host here at ComplianceCohort.com. This compliance clip, we are going to talk about the Interagency Statement on BSA Enforcement. So this was a statement that came out by the regulatory agencies, the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, the OCC, and the NCUA all came together and issued this joint statement. Now, FinCEN actually issued their own statement separately, but we're not going to talk about this in this clip. Now, this is a topic that we actually discussed in our fall 2020 quarterly compliance update, and it's something we also talked about in our BSA annual update that was released in the fall of 2020. But I figured I'd share this with you because here in November of 2020, we're celebrating BSA month here at the Compliance Cohort, just for fun. It's our BSA month, and we just figured it would be fun to focus on BSA this month. So we're going to talk about this topic. This was something that was released in August of 2020, and it was by the regulators, and it told us a couple of things that was interesting. It first of all told us not much, but then it told us something that I find interesting because it sealed something that's been a topic of debate for some time. Now, the first thing it told us was that there's no new regulatory requirements as part of this statement. Now, what the statement is really doing is it's describing the circumstances in which an agency like the NCUA or the Federal Reserve, OCC, or FDIC will issue a mandatory cease and desist order to address noncompliance with BSA AML requirements. So what they're talking about here is when they're going to issue a public enforcement action, because cease and desist orders are public enforcement actions typically. So they're talking about when they would do that. And what they say is that isolated or technical violations and deficiencies are generally not considered the kinds of problems that would result in this type of enforcement action, especially not a public enforcement action. Now, if you had some major issues where you're harming consumers or had major flaws, then of course you can end up with a CMP. But they go on to say that they give a couple of examples of types of compliance failures that would result in a cease and desist order. And there's two categories that are specifically discussed in this statement. Now, the first category is very important. They say if your organization fails to establish and maintain a reasonably designed BSA AML compliance program. Of course, if you don't have a BSA program, you're going to end up with a cease and desist. Stop that practice until you fix it. Now, the interesting thing is, where do we draw the line? What is considered a reasonably designed BSA AML compliance program? Because if we have a lot of deficiencies in our CIP process and our customer identification program and identifying customers and account opening, then that may be that we don't have a reasonably designed BSA AML program. So my point here is technical deficiencies that they talk about on this top bullet point that's typically not going to result in a cease and desist could, if it ultimately turns into the opinion that you failed to establish and maintain a reasonably designed BSA AML compliance program for the size and complexity of your organization. Now, I think we understand that, and I think this really isn't telling us anything we don't know. So they're just reiterating this statement. The other thing they say here is another thing that would result in a cease and desist order is if you fail to correct previously identified issues. I've been saying for years that this is the most important thing you can do as a BSA officer, and if we're talking about compliance, as a compliance officer, is to correct previously identified issues. If you don't, you will have problems, and they're really just reiterating this here. So if you have repeat violations, exam after exam, they may end up issuing a cease and desist order. So that's the first thing they told us. But what they also do is they go on and tell us something else that's pretty interesting here. They say that the statement also addresses how the agencies are going to evaluate violations of individual components, which is known as the pillars of the BSA AML compliance program. Now, when we talk about pillars, how many pillars are there for BSA? How many? Well, traditionally there's been 4, right? And then with the ultimate beneficial ownership rules, they started talking about a 5th pillar, did they not? They did. So there's been discussion on whether there's 4 pillars or 5 pillars. And now what they did in April of 2020 this year, they revised the BSA exam manual to kind of take away the language of pillars. They really took away the language of pillars, and they're not quite using that exact language anymore, but this statement's still talking about it. And what they said is this. They said the statement also describes how the agencies are now incorporating the customer due diligence regulations and record-keeping requirements, that recent rules, into the internal controls pillar of a bank's BSA AML compliance program. So all that fuss that they made about this being a fifth pillar, they're now just incorporating that into one of the existing 4 pillars. So the answer to the question of how many pillars do we have is really just 4. They had talked about going with 5, but they decided to roll the ultimate beneficial ownership rules into that pillar related to internal controls. It really covers all those pieces of a BSA AML program. And there are many pieces. There's a whole bunch of pieces. And we actually break out those pieces when we talk about when we go into our BSA Bootcamp, which is a product we have in our store at compliancecohort.com. We spend 3.5 full hours of education in that program, talking about all the components. And when we get to internal controls, we spend a ton of time focusing on all those different elements, things like CIP, beneficial ownership, monetary instrument logs, record keeping requirements for wire transfers, and so on and so on and so on. So that is something new. This is interesting that they rolled that 5th pillar back in. So there's only 4 pillars, but they're kind of taking the language away from the 4 pillars. So that's where we're at. So this is an interesting interagency BSA statement. While it didn't tell us a lot, it did tell us a little bit. And for us BSA nerds, we love this kind of information. So it's pretty enlightening from a BSA geek standpoint, which I tend to fall into that category. Now, that's all I have for you today. If you want to take a deep dive into BSA this month, you can do that, or any month, whenever you're watching this video. In our store, we've got some deep dives. We have our BSA Bootcamp that, as I said, is a very intensive BSA program going over all the foundational requirements that you need to have in the 4 pillars of your BSA AML program. We also have a BSA annual update that's in our store you could take a look at. We have different training, a basic BSA program, and we also have BSA training for the board of directors and an annual BSA update for the board. So lots of BSA opportunities if you want to take a deep dive and join a fellow BSA nerd while we do it. So that's all I have for you today. If you're new to the compliance cohort, don't feel like you have to purchase anything. We have a bunch of free stuff, free videos just like this in our store. We have a free membership where there's free articles, a bunch of resources, and free compliance clips where they're supposed to be 3 to 5 minute training videos. And of course, this one went long like many of them do. So it's available for you for free. If you want to take deep dives, you can look at our store, compliancecohort.com/store. If you're an existing member, thank you so much for being a member. We appreciate you. You're the reason why we do what we do. We hope we make a little bit of difference in your day, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.